Well, hello, this is Chris Tenny-Brittian, and welcome to week 5 of the Introduction to New Testament at the Ministry Training Program of Phillips Theological Seminary. You would think I say that so often that I'd be able to just do it quite like that. Anyways, this week we're looking at Paul's epistles. An stole means a letter, a stole, a writing that is sent out around. So that's what we're looking at. You've got a lot of reading to do. You have a lot of information that you're able to draw on, but these are the pieces that I want to draw on and make sure that I've called to your attention. One is about the letters, and you will probably read this, and that is that the letters are often written under people's names. So it is believed that of the 13 letters that are attributed to Paul, probably, well, I hate saying that because I don't want to say that, but many believe, how about that only 8 of those letters were actually written by Paul. And you remember from our discussion of criticism, literary criticism, that's how they would have, or they arrive at that belief that the way that they're written, the devices that they use, that helps to show or explain why these may not be Paul's letters. So the 8 that are undisputed as Paul's writing letter is the letter to the Romans, the Second Corinthian letter. Notice not the first, but the Second Corinthian letter. And by the way, there's a thought that there is a third Corinthian letter. We just haven't found it yet. Galatians, the letter to the Galatians, the Colossians, the Philippians, to Philemon, and to the first letter to the Thessalonians. Right? Maybe there's a ninth, and that would be the second letter that was written to Timothy. Nonetheless, though, these letters are attributed to Paul, which speaks of who he is. That speaks of his authority and why that's important. The letters are important. All right. Speaking of authority, these are some of the items I want you to be looking for or sensitive to as you look at these letters this week. One is how much time, how much writing Paul spends on asserting his authority. You remember that he was not right there following Jesus, actually following him in person. In fact, he persecuted Jesus. And yet he calls himself an apostle, just the same as those now I'll say 13, because there were 12. And after Judas's death, we had Matthias come along. So he wants to assert his authority. He's continually validating that authority, his apostleship. He continually puts his credentials out there. So be watching for that. Another dynamic, if you will, I want you to look for is circumcision. Especially, we'll look at that and be sensitive, aware of that. The book of Galatians, Luke Timothy Johnson, in his book, Writing of the New Testaments. And hey, if you can get a copy of that book, it is out of print. There were not enough reasonably priced copies of it that I could assign it or have it as one of our required readings. It is fabulous. What he asserts is that in the letter of Galatians to the Galatians, he's trying to convince them that Christianity is not a mystery religion. Now, mystery religions have been around for centuries at that time, and they were devoted to gods or goddesses, and they were mysterious. There were certain things that you were made aware of. From what I understand of the Masons and the Shriners, and those of you that are affiliated with those groups, you might be able to tell me if I'm wrong on this, or you not might be. You can tell me if I'm wrong on this. But there are certain, if you will, mysteries there that come with your different degrees. So the same in mystery religions. The people in Galatia and likely in other places believed that Christianity was a mystery religion, that that it talked about a God, that it had these different levels of information, or so it appeared. And um, and so what then you'll see is them talking about circumcision, and they think that Paul is holding out on them, that they are not able to enter the fullness of the mystery because he has not given them the secret of circumcision. And that's apparent because they haven't been circumcised. And you can tell how important this is, that here are adult males who want to be circumcised. So be watching for that and how he treats that, or at least maybe not be watching for that, but know that that's part of what's underlying that in that conversation. Um, Look for what Paul has to say regarding church leadership and the expectations on Christians. Well, I was reading ahead into these letters, and over and over and over again, I was convicted, if you will, the ways that I do not live the life of one who is full of the Spirit, of one who is not fully committed, perhaps, or not living out their commitment to their walk with Jesus. What else am I wanting to have you look for? Expectations of Christians. Um, Look at 4:11, Ephesians 4:11. This is my life verse, which is why, of course, I bring it up. It said, some were created to be prophets, some apostles, some teachers, some evangelists, right? These are called the fivefold ministries, the fivefold offices in some Christian traditions. I know, particularly in Pentecostal traditions, you'll hear of these fivefold ministries, and that through and then the gifts, that each of us is given gifts, and we're to live those out. So not only is it how to live, it's about leadership and our stepping up to leadership, and how all of us are called to some kind of leadership. It may not be administratively, but it may be using our gifts of helps or of assistance. So look at what it has to say about leadership. When it comes time to talk about the fruits of the Spirit, look at what he has to say about the rotty, fleshy fruit. In one of those churches that I've mentioned that I pastored, actually in a couple of them, when we people love to hear about the fruits of the spirits: love, joy, peace, patience. Uh, but we forget what precedes that, right? And so I made this mobile that had little wooden apple cutouts, and it had these pretty fruits on there, and love, joy, peace. And then it had and those were big fruits. The smaller fruits, and they were colored all nasty, had holes in it that had those other kind of fruits in there. And from there out, I began to say to what are they called? Not search committees, but nominating committees. Yeah, would that we called them search committees, but these nominating committees. I would say, hey, let's measure these leaders that we're considering based on how much fruit they exhibit, but and how much rotty, fleshy fruit they're living out. And it began to change the way we looked at leadership in at least a couple of the churches. Well, actually, in both of those conflicted churches, conflict-filled churches that I worked with. All right, so expectations, measuring leadership. Take this seriously. Remember, these aren't just some writings that are out there. These are set up for us as models, and more than models, as as teachings, as directives. Paul isn't just saying that to the church in Philippi or in Colossae. He is saying this for churches in general, which brings me now around to the letter to the Ephesians. And many of these letters, actually, these letters are encyclicals. Maybe you've heard of encyclicals that are written by the popes. That's usually where we hear that term, that classification of letters. The Ephesians definitely was written as an encyclical. It went to Ephesus, but it was also passed around to other churches. And we have seen that these letters this one has the church in Ephesus, right? But then when it passed around to say, we don't have this, but say Galatia, it would say to the church in Galatians. So the people who are rewriting it, the scribes rewriting it, descended on to this next location as they're going to plug in the name of that next location, and so on and so forth. And in the various manuscripts that they have found, they may change a word or two there, add a sentence or three there, but that is to personalize it for that area. But there's still the core. It's still that important message. So read these perhaps as the letters to the students of the 2019 Introduction to the New Testament from the Ministry Training Program of Phillips Theological Seminary. Read them as letters that are written to you, and think, how am I going to write this letter to the congregation I get to serve? And remember, serving doesn't mean each of you is serving in a church, maybe not as a paid staff member, but at the very least as a non-paid staff member, right? Okay, so the last two pieces that I want to pass on to you. One is, this, of course, is my heart. And you will remember that opening piece that I gave to you for the introduction to the 9-year-old's overview of the Bible for adults, and how it lays out the Bible talking about the shalom paradise, the perfect relationship, the necessary symbiotic relationship of the four relationships, and then how it culminates in that last chapter of Revelation, or how it comes together, those first 3 chapters of Genesis and the last 3 chapters of Revelation, the parentheses, if you will. Oh my gosh, when I was reading Romans again, it was, oh, Paul, thank you. There it is. He lays it out. He's talking about relationships. He's talking about right relationships. People often hate the letter to the Romans, see it as extremely tedious. They dislike it because it's talking about justice and righteousness and law. Well, let me tell you this. This is in the study Bible, the CEB study Bible, and again, I'm reading this last week, and my husband is sitting there with me, and I'm going, yes, 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 and I'm underlining it because I haven't seen a study Bible outline it this way, and it was like, yes, point this out, because the word that gets used for justice and righteousness, the righteous, they are the same word. The word is dikaiosune. It is about righteousness. It is about justification. It is about justice. But the word really means relationship. What it's talking about is living in a right relationship. Paul is talking about restoring the right relationship with humanity, with us, and with God, and that's why Jesus came, to restore that. And he talks about, this is not living under the old law. This is about living under the new law of righteousness. And that he says that this is not about about what we can done. It's not even, yeah, it's not about what we can do. It's about what Jesus has already done. He's already reset that relationship. Jesus has already brought the righteousness. He's already set everything in place for the restoration of our relationships, for the right relationships. Try reading Romans that way. I used to dislike terribly Romans, but when I started to read it, every time I see the words righteous or righteousness, I think right relationship. Every time I see the word justice or justification, I read right relationship. And oh my goodness, the whole tenor of the letter to the Romans, the letter to you and to me, to us, changes. Spend some time rereading Romans, if not this week. Make a note in your calendar to remind you to go back to it, reread it. As not just a promise, as telling you what is real. So Romans, dikaiosune, right relationships. When I talk about watching for the evidence of this shalom principle about the restoration of the four relationships as the return, the restoration of paradise, this is called a hermeneutic. That's a word I want you to know. You're really going to pick up on that. I think in the preaching class, perhaps you'll hear the word hermeneutic. A hermeneutic is how we enter the text. It's what we bring to the text. It is, if you will, the meta narrative. It's the overarching view of how we're reading the text. Obviously, I read the text from the hermeneutic of restoration, and restoration specific of the restoration of the four relationships. So as I'm looking at the Old Testament writings, the Hebrew writings, and I'm looking at the Newer Testament, the Christian writings, I'm doing that. I'm looking within and interpreting within that shalom, that restoration view, that hermeneutic. So I just wanted to toss that word out to you. I may not have done a very good job of explaining that. I don't expect you to use that word. But if you've got questions about that, just email me offline, send me an email, and or call me, and we'll figure out how to say it, perhaps, or look it up and see what that has to say, and that will help. But I did want to put that word out before you. All right. We are going to have another great week. You all are awesome. If you see my husband at all, if you're, I sit there next to him on the weekends. I get to be with him, and I'm going through class and the notes, and I just keep saying to him, "Oh my gosh, this is so awesome. Oh my gosh, listen to this. Oh my gosh, look at this. My class is so awesome. My students are so awesome. You are so awesome." And I know I've given you this really hard task of writing, putting out there, interpreting these sections of scripture. It is not easy, but you're rising to the task and you're doing it. And you're asking me, do I have this? Am I doing this the way you need it, the way you want it? I would like you to think of this in terms of the way I need it, because what I am going to do, definitely, I've already begun. I'm compiling your writings and putting them out there, and we will have at the end, and it's probably going to be more like within a month after the end of this class, maybe 2 months, because we've got conflict intervention after this. Yes, that is that shameless commercial for conflict intervention. Not and the other ones too. Okay, so I'm going to be shifting gears, have to shift gears over to that, but I'll be laying these out. So what we'll have is the Intro to New Testament 2019 edition of our New Testament commentary. How about that? How cool is that? So that is really why I need those in that order. And your final assignment is going to be going back through your postings, not all your responses, but your actual postings, and get those into your earlier ones and any others that you need to edit, that you want to add to, again, edit in what your classmates have shared in their posts. Maybe not, but maybe you want to do that. So that is, again, that will be our final assignment, to make sure that you've got everything within that order and are presenting all the additional information that you have learned, so that we can have the most complete commentary that we can use. All right, that's it. I have to say goodbye to you. Have an amazing week. I will look for you on the discussion forums. Bye-bye.